That's yours. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. There's just about a few seconds before I call the meeting to order. But if you intend on testifying today, please make sure to sign up and place one of the sign-in sheets in the basket. Thank you. And with that, it is 3 o'clock, so I will call the Monday, February 6th, 2023 Design Review Committee meeting to order. And for the record, I can see that the committee members are present, as is staff Hanna Veal, Betty Gum, and Jenah Thornborrow. Are there any changes to the agenda?
None for me.
None by staff. All right, the next item on the agenda is the consent agenda, consisting of the January 3rd, 2023 minutes.
I move to approve consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. And then we do have 2 hearings on the agenda today. For the public hearings, please, once we get to the public hearing portion, if you wish to testify, you'll be able to testify after the applicant provides a presentation and a staff report. We'll call you up, and if you wouldn't mind coming to the dais and saying your full name for the record. If you are on Zoom and wish to testify, if your Zoom name is different than your full name, we will ask that you spell out your full name. And with that, I'll turn it over to Katrina Klum with Erstad Architects for Design Review Fiscal Year 2022, number 22.
Just to confirm, you guys on screen are seeing the PowerPoint presentation. Excellent. Katrina Klum, Erstad Architects. This is 47th Street Apartments. We are located on 47th and Adams, and this diagram is really to show the complexity of the site context within walking distance to the Boise Greenbelt, city parks, schools, etc. There's also a couple transit stops adjacent on Chinden. Looking at our landscape plan here, you will see the 47th Street is the primary access to our site. We also have plenty of perimeter landscape meeting all applicable city codes, along with a central courtyard space occurring between the 2 primary central buildings. In addition, we looked at making a connection to the 46th Street development that will be happening after our presentation, and that connection is at the rear of the property. One thing to note on this slide that shows it really well is that we're tiling an existing irrigation ditch, and that is occurring along the property edges, and we are unable to plant trees along that irrigation ditch, but we have anticipated that, and we've placed plenty of trees up against the buildings. Anywhere we can get landscape where there might be concern by the neighbors is planted up against those buildings. This is an aerial view of our site. You're sort of hovering over 47th Street, if you will. The white buildings at the rear of this image are the adjacent property development. And I say that lightly because it's simply a massing and not intended to represent their design. You can see here how the buildings step in and out. They sort of modulate along their facades, breaking up those long building edges. The roofs also undulate in a very similar fashion, again, creating sort of this very dynamic roof layout. The rear buildings also step and create some of that similar profile. They are a little bit shorter there along that back property line. You're standing on the back corner of the property, and I think this is probably the best image that shows that irrigation line that will be tiled. And you can see we're planting shrubs and grasses where we can over that line, and then all of the trees adjacent to the buildings to try to meet those requirements where we can. This is a view on 47th, and one of the feedback pieces we got from the design review pre-app was they wanted a little bit more dynamic architecture along 47th, which we agreed with. And so we've flipped the front door of those front units to the 47th Street, as well as opened up the patio areas, which will be able to look on 47th, added a bunch more windows. So we feel this elevation is a lot more dynamic than the last time we presented. Again, along 47th, you can see a better view of that patio cutout, creating that connection to 47th, as well as a little peek to the courtyard beyond. This is that courtyard I mentioned. The amenities will be turf grass, play space, as well as a sport court towards the back. This is the opposite side of that courtyard. We're also planning on barbecue amenities, general hangout space for all of the tenants. You're starting to see a view of some of that guest parking here, which we feel is adequate given all of the research that we've done, as well as the recent changes that Garden City is looking at to their own code. So you'll see that in the packet. This is the opposite property line from the irrigation ditch, again, showing all of the landscaping as well as the sort of individual main entries for each of those units, providing a little bit of privacy, but still being open to the public. This is sort of your pedestrian view of what you might see as you start to approach that adjacent development. And our interior site, we also responded to that development. And so this is just a little gathering area. We'll have a strong pedestrian connection all the way from 47th through the development. You can also start to see, again, some of that modulation that's occurring where the buildings are stepping in and out, creating those facades that are broken up. One thing we wanted to mention is looking at sort of our office space as well as our bike storage. We strategically pulled those to the interior of the site to place them adjacent to the guest parking, as well as being a little bit more convenient for all the buildings on the development. And so we feel like the placement of these is strategic and appropriate for the development. Also, a development of this size, it should hopefully be pretty easy to find those locations. We're still exploring what the signage options could be, but we can place signage on the canopies. We can explore color wayfinding if we need to, but again, based on the size of the development and the placement adjacent to parking, we feel like it's appropriate. We're still looking at the options on bike parking, but we're looking at roughly 15 bike parks, which is meeting city code. We're also looking at e-bike charging facilities within that bike storage as options. And then this is looking at that management office, again, strategically placed against that guest parking there. And that is the end of our presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any
Yeah.
questions for the applicant?
Can you go to a site plan and maybe draw with your mouse, just hovering over where the Thurman Mill is currently? Okay. So it's that, well, it's that dash line then maybe, or no, that's a parcel line,
I mean, that's a parcel line, but
but it goes
it's
internal to the site.
It's very internal to the site, yes, and we're proposing to push it along the property edge and then wrap it because we have to carry it through to the adjacent properties.
And then it exits at the same spot where your mouse is now. Yeah,
Yep, it's gonna exit right
Okay.
there.
Okay.
Mhm.
thanks.
Any further questions of the applicant? All right, seeing none. I'll turn it over to staff for a staff report.
Right, good afternoon, everybody. This is design review fiscal year 2022-0022. It is located at 233 and 311 East 47th Street. There were resubmittals, or rather late exhibit submittals, on January 31st, 2023, which have since been uploaded online as well as sent to the committee members. And they need to be formally accepted into the record as they were a late exhibit. And I am showing the landscape plan that was part of that submittal packet as one of those documents for reference. That packet essentially added a landscape plan to address the arborist report as well as a sustainability checklist, but it is not reflected in the staff report that is in the record. We have received agency comments from the Department of Environmental Quality, the Garden City Engineer, North Ada County Fire Rescue, Republic Services, and ACHD, which have all been included online for the record, as well as a brief summary in the staff report. But as far as getting into all the comments in the staff report, I can stand by and answer any of the questions that the committee or the public might have, especially those comments that have been highlighted in yellow. But for ease of things, I'm just going to go through some of the more important items that need to be discussed. Just going through the packet here. So on page 10, there is discussion regarding the multifamily aspects to this development. And while they are providing amenities and the required number of amenities, there is discussion that the committee and applicant and staff should have regarding the mailbox office room, the enclosed bike parking spaces, the property management office, and a directory map of the development. Since some of those things, so for example, the office and management or the management office and post office area are identified, and I can zoom in here on the site plan. They have been identified. The floor plans are preliminary in nature. Essentially, it doesn't identify a lot of the details regarding where those post office boxes are going to go. And it's not extremely clear as to if there is going to be someone on site at all times for that property management office. So there's just some questions left unanswered there. And then regarding the design of these locations, as Katrina, the applicant, was able to show earlier in her presentation, it doesn't necessarily not meet code, and it's not facing the public street. So maybe the design review committee doesn't necessarily care what the architectural features are on these end locations, but they're not super prominent, at least as far as indicating what function those rooms are providing. So maybe some discussion there, like I mentioned in the staff report. Additionally, there is shown to be, or there is fencing shown on the renderings, but it's not identified in the site plans. Fencing is not required. However, there could be privacy concerns, especially regarding the density and the adjacent residential properties. There are existing fences on some of the adjacent properties, and there is a generalized condition in the decision document to require that if fencing is to be placed on site, it needs to be compliant with code. So that doesn't necessarily need discussion unless it's in regards to the privacy. For the common open space, I have drafted. Well, first of all, they are compliant with the common open space and the amenities. However, it could change due to the stormwater facilities on site. It appears that the stormwater facilities are underneath or at least surrounding some of the amenity areas. So for example, in the middle of the property where the sports court or the bocce ball court is, I believe that's where one of the stormwater mitigation areas is to be located. Development services staff is not in charge of reviewing those facilities. It just might be a point of discussion that if the site can't handle on-site stormwater mitigation appropriately, some of that common space might be changed. Then there's the discussion regarding the Fairview Acres open irrigation ditch. Right now it's currently an open ditch, and they propose to tile it over. You can defer to the staff report as to how the design review committee can approve of the tiling of that irrigation ditch, but we will need explicit approval from the committee here today for the permission to tile it over. One of the main reasons staff believes that there could be permission granted is due to the fact that on the, I'll call it the northwest side, which is 47th Street, it is tiled there. The canal runs under the road, and then to the southeast side or right-hand side of the plan, the adjacent property associated with design review fiscal year 2022-0023, which we will be hearing next, is also proposing to tile it over. There are comments in regard to the design, the architectural design and fenestrations, glazing of those end units that face 47th Street. There were comments from the pre-application discussion meeting where the end units needed to address the street, have their front door facing 47th, appear as a front facade, etc. And new renderings and schematics have been submitted. And so the committee needs to determine if what was submitted is satisfactory in satisfying those comments. The site is deficient 8 guest parking spaces. They are parking for all of the residential units themselves. However, there is the deficiency of 8 parking spaces still. There was a standards or an alternative to code standards submitted. So they're providing bike parking, scooter parking, e-bike parking, and rideshare parking. Or at least that was mentioned in the packet, but it's not necessarily identified specifically within the site plans. And with the rideshare program or shared parking, there needs to be formalized agreements drafted at least prior to construction. And then just for wrapping up the comments, I suppose there were comments regarding the sustainability checklist. I believe those two have been null and void at this point because they resubmitted the sustainability checklist, and it does meet the standards of the 6 points required. It is conditioned in the decision document, so the committee can either choose to keep it in there or remove it depending on if they accept that new sustainability checklist. They're meeting their street trees. And there is an arborist report requiring that 179.75 calipers be mitigated for based off of the removal of existing trees on site. The old landscape plans showed that 140 caliper inches were being mitigated, which was a deficiency of 39.75. Since then, on January 31st, like I mentioned, there was a new landscape plan submitted, but staff has not been able to thoroughly analyze it. So any condition drafted in the decision document regarding mitigation for those trees should remain. And then for my last comment, there is a lack of perimeter landscaping. However, that is only due to the gravity irrigation line that they are proposing to install. With the canal, as it is right now, it's running through essentially the middle of the property, and the applicant is proposing to tile it and relocate it along the northern property boundary line. And so with that being tiled there, the perimeter trees that are required are not permitted due to those irrigation facilities. So with that, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Veal? I just have a point of clarification, and that's on the tiling. And so what I'm understanding you to say is that should the adjacent property also be allowed to tile, and then there, it would meet a portion of code saying that tiling is allowed should one side of the property or both sides of the property already be tiled. Is that?
Yeah, and I can quote code directly. So code says that the design review committee can permit the tiling of the canal if the irrigation ditch, lateral canal or drain is enclosed on both ends adjacent to the property, and the adjacent properties are fully developed in a manner that future opening of the enclosed irrigation ditch, lateral canal or drain is infeasible.
Thank you. All right. Seeing no further questions, I'll open up the public hearing portion. We have two people in person who have signed up to speak on this matter. The first of which is Tom Shapacher. All right, sorry about that. Yes, please. And if you wouldn't mind, for them to be able to hear you in Zoom, you'll have to speak right into that microphone. Thank you.
Okay, can you guys hear me all right? Okay, so my name's Tom Schopbacher. I own two parcels that are next directly adjacent to they're on the east side, kind of the northeast side of the property. 4651 Adams and 4639.5 Adams. And we're the lucky recipients of the trash enclosure right next to it, to the property. So when I first pulled it up and looked at the map, our properties, I have two that are right next to each other, and the trash enclosure is right exactly across the fence line. And I think it's where you're saying that they would move and tile over the irrigation ditch, so there's no trees there. So it's kind of a big surprise and a concern of mine that for such a dense project with 60 units, and so I'm guessing potentially 100 plus people, that all the garbage for the site goes to this back corner, and it's kind of all affecting one neighbor, which is us. So we kind of went around town and looked at different projects, apartment buildings. Some are condos, but some are apartments. And it looks like typically those are placed someplace centrally to the development. So I guess that's my main concern with the project at this point is just that they would look at where the location of that enclosure is, and it not be affecting just one neighbor essentially. by both its adjacency to how close it is to the fence line, just the fact that's where everybody in the units are coming back to this back corner and throwing their garbage, and the dumpster closing and the garbage man coming and things. So that's something I would hope that staff and the committee would be concerned with and look at for us. The second issue is parking. I read through all the material submitted, and I saw the argument for having fewer parking stalls for guests. And because there's no parking on Adams already, 47th is going to become really a hot commodity to park there on the street. And a lot of people that live on Adams have to, when they have guests and things, they park on 47th. So I feel like if you were to give them, an exemption from that rule, you're providing kind of 8 more spots on the street for the project, which is already going to be taking a ton, even though it's got some parking on site to meet code. So I read through what their reasons were for asking for it, and I get the transit, that you push for transit. That is kind of hard to prove that that's going to do anything. I mean, I think I've seen a lot of projects and it's often said, but I don't know that it's really ever has an effect. It also said there was a survey included, but I didn't see that exhibit attached. So maybe that's something people can look at. It cited a survey that the public didn't feel like parking was an issue. And I think anything in Garden City is going to be dated immediately because of how many projects are going on. So people are going to adjust their opinions pretty quickly based on how much is being built. And then I also don't think that the financial feasibility of the project is something that the design committee of the city should change the parking requirements to meet the fiscal feasibility of the project. You mentioned the fencing, and I guess I couldn't tell from the drawings if there was fencing, but that would be a good thing to have, considering again the density. If there's less landscaping on the perimeter due to the tiling of the ditch, and then just that they're 30 feet high, the building's 30 feet high, and so where our properties sit, both houses are on the back part of the parcel, so they're really close to the property line. And so to have these buildings towering over them is going to be, it's dense, it's building dense, and I know that some of that comes with it, but just that you guys could think through all those ramifications to these properties. I didn't buy these properties to develop them. I bought them for rentals and for employees at my business, which is also in Garden City, employs 40 people down at Artist Metals, further down towards the Riverside Hotel. And so I'm not looking to develop these as more livability for the people that live there at those properties. So thanks for letting me speak, and I hope you consider all these things in your next steps. Thanks.
Thank you. Any questions? All right, thank you. The next person we have signed up is David Bedford.
I don't have a whole lot to say. I live on 4651 Adams Street, and the location of the garbage is my main concern. Trash for not just 60 people, but possibly 60 households that close to the property line. I don't feel, I would rather not live next to a dumpster for 60 units. That's about all I have to say, really.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That concludes the individuals we have signed up here at City Hall. Is there anybody else that would like to testify? All right. Is there anyone online who wishes to testify? It looks like Jason Jones.
Jason Jones, 208 East 33rd Street. I guess just one of my maybe comments that I'll point out, I know they're already short on guest parking, but I know when I've looked at some previous projects that have come through, that guest parking ratio for a lot of PUD applications has been reduced as low as like 1 guest parking space for every 8 units. And I wonder if there's a possibility of maybe removing a guest parking space that's centrally located and moving the trash enclosure there. so that it wasn't affecting neighbors quite as much. And maybe that's something that can be discussed. Because again, they really, while they're maybe not meeting the code of one guest parking space for every 2 units, for most of these PUD applications, they're far exceeding the parking that's been required for other developments of this size. So maybe the possibility of removing a guest parking space to move that trash enclosure so that it doesn't affect the neighbors might be something smart to look at for design review. It's my only comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else online who wishes to provide testimony? All right, seeing none, we'll turn it back over to the applicant.
Your comments on the trash have been heard, and the enclosure itself will be a CMU typical commercial development enclosure with gates. And so I think, you know, it should be well contained. We also can set the frequency of that trash pickup with Republic Services. So we can get that picked up daily to cause those concerns to hopefully be less. Certainly if we have any flexibility on our parking, we're all ears. But in order to do our best to meet Garden City Code as it currently stands, we have put as many guest parking spots on site as possible. But if there's flexibility there, and we can look at some type of rearrangement to pull it off that property line or get it more central, we're all ears. So thank you.
Thank you. Don't go away just yet. Thanks. Are there any questions for Ms. Coleman?
I do have a question.
Yep.
Could you go over where perimeter fencing is going to be provided or proposed and
Absolutely.
where it's not?
So we're basically proposing perimeter fencing on all of the property lines surrounding the development. There will be a break in the fencing here again, as it relates and ties to that adjacent development. But what we were showing in our renderings was a typical 6-foot wood slat fence. We haven't fully designed that, but we know it needs to meet all applicable Garden City Code. And then some of the additional fencing that you saw was some privacy fencing for the courtyard space up front along 47th. And then we've got privacy screens happening at each of the front doors.
Okay. Thank you for that. Also another question, was it ever considered to look at integrating the portions of open irrigation ditch in that central kind of plaza space that runs through the center of the development?
We looked at several options, but as Hannah mentioned, stormwater, that became our biggest concern. And so trying to centralize all of the stormwater into a reasonable area to collect. It's happening under drive aisles, it's happening under the sport court. We had to push that irrigation to that property edge in order to make the development work.
Okay, and then I guess another question that I have in regards to the trash enclosure. Would it be possible, or did you go through the process of maybe really considering the amount of waste for that size of an enclosure for this size of development, and maybe multiple enclosures, maybe if there was an enclosure on each side, on the opposite side there I'm just trying to think that there's going to be a lot of activity in that trash enclosure. And then it's on the side of the development that doesn't have, or is minimal planting materials due to the location of that irrigation ditch.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we discussed individual bins that could alley load. I mean, we looked at it happening in the central area, but from a sightline perspective, that didn't make sense. Because you'd basically be looking through your courtyard at your trash. We did have it adjacent to this sort of backup piece on the car parks at one point in time. Logistically, based off of what Republic Service needs, that big, long, 60 feet in front of that enclosure and the adjacent garage, it just ultimately didn't work out. But we could reevaluate if that's the desire of that committee.
Well, it seems to me that on the opposite side there, it's the same, is it not? Pretty much the same configuration as where it's sitting now. Yeah. I mean, if it was to go on that side, or if there was to be an enclosure on both sides to better serve that size of the facility and the distances between units and that trash enclosure, what single location?
Yeah, it's definitely close, and it's workable. It just comes down to these end parking stalls here.
Sure.
There and there. And again, just trying to sneak in as many of those spaces as we could possibly fit on site to meet that code. But yes, in a short answer to, if we really needed to split this into two, we could place it on either side. We would probably lose a parking space doing that.
Okay. Thank you.
And Republic won't roll the dumpster out into a drive aisle. They have to be able to get it
Make
without
this
getting out of the
turn.
truck.
That's what they've told us, yes, upon reviewing this. I mean, and they even were concerned about access, and we had to reassure them that it was all per their code.
Okay, and then I have a kind of follow-up question, or I need to hear it maybe stated a different way, but the irrigation, once that's tiled in the pipe, you're saying that because of the drive aisles being permeable pavers or whatever, that pipe can't be in the drive aisle and that pipe can't be in the central kind of sports court area.
Talking to the drainage district, they really want it along the property edge, and they really want to maintain their clearance and all of their appropriate easements over the top of it. So it doesn't work as well to try to put it anywhere else because of their need for continuous access and their legal right to have the easement over the top of it.
Which they could have down the drive aisle. And then in between building, the end buildings, I guess. What you're saying it's a easement thing, not a civil engineering.
It's both. Yeah, our civil engineer has been working closely with them to try to ensure that we're meeting all of their standards. The other complexity as it relates to the site is those drive aisles are picking up all of the site drainage. And so again, when you step back and you look at all of the pieces of the site and not just cherry pick this one issue, we feel like this is the best compromise to meet all applicable agencies.
And then are you using what is surface water for irrigation on site?
We're not, we're collecting it in an infiltration system.
No, I mean the irrigation water that comes through the site that you're tiling. Are you using that water to
Got it.
water the street trees and perimeter landscaping and internal landscaping?
We are not, based off the recommendation from our landscape architect. There's apparently some complexities involved in using that irrigation water. So from a development standpoint, it makes more sense to connect to city water.
Thank you.
I have one more question before we let you go there.
You're good.
Just on that, we'll call it the kind of the south plaza space in between buildings. Are they both C down there?
Yeah, this space right here.
Yeah, what are those little bump outs there? Those little bump outs in the structure.
Oh, and the structure, got it. Those are the fire riser rooms.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I think that's all that I have right now.
All right. Well, thank you then. I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it over to discussion with the committee members.
Well, I guess I can go ahead and start. Some of the concerns that I still have, and a few of them were on the staff report. I think that just in looking at the amenities, I think that they're just the lack of identity for those, and just from a visual wayfinding of those elements. I'm speaking more of the bike storage component and the office, and mail room and such, that I think that something more needs to be done with, whether it's articulation of the exterior facade, fenestrations, materials, something to enhance that visual wayfinding of those elements, rather than they look like they're just another unit and we're going to indicate with some signage. I think something more needs to happen with those. The other one I think we probably need to discuss is whether these side facades, as they are with the door moved around and maybe some added fenestrations, are still meeting the intent of really addressing the street on the 47th Street elevations for those end units. I think some discussion there is warranted. The bigger one in my mind here, and I mentioned it in the pre-app, was to feel how the rear building C and building C, how they really become connected and be part of this overall development. And I think it's kind of headed in the right direction with that little plaza area, but even that to me feels like we've got this small plaza and we've got these bump out utilitarian components, and nothing about that space reads, oh, continue moving this way and come around the corner and we're accessing all the rest of these units. I just feel that there's a big disconnection between the in buildings, and just from a access standpoint from visitors, just to to have them feel like they're an integral part to this whole development. And in that same token, it would be, I guess, in my mind, with a development this size, and we've got multiple points of access, spines they're coming down perpendicular to 47th Street, that central spine is where the activity court and the open lawn area seems, in my mind, to be the large group identifier as far as the entire location or the entire development. And so maybe I feel that something more something more of a node, whether it be a hardscape plaza-esque type of a node at the intersection of 47th and where that central spine activities area is, something more is warranted there to create a even stronger connection. I mean, it looked at the presentation with the imagery there, that there was some fencing, and I mean, it seemed still kind of closed off from the street frontage. I think there's an opportunity there to make it more like a pedestrian node that brings people in and invites them into the internal of this space, which then creates, in my mind, if the procession is going to be down that central space to get across the parking to a plaza to further gain access to the back end of the development, it seems to strengthen that quite a bit, to do something on those lines. And I would even go as far as to say, I'd like to see those fire riser rooms go somewhere else and really kind of open that throat up as you wrap around that corner. So it really wants to draw you in to access those last two buildings. But I would even think maybe even a raised section there at the crosswalk access point between the plaza and the sport court, something to really accentuate that this is a first of all pedestrian access, second of all vehicular access. The irrigation ditch tiling, I think we both kind of came at that from two different points. I wish I would have liked to seen it incorporated even partially, if possible, in that kind of open lawn space, central access. But anyways, those were my, and then the trash enclosure. I think that consideration for, maybe we allow a reduction in another one of the parking stalls, get another trash enclosure on the other side, split the amount of usage and activity that's going to be at one of those locations. Or if it's just a single enclosure, maybe it needs to flop to the other side to where it has a little bit more landscaping opportunity around that. Just some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll kind of touch on that and maybe some of these in reverse order while they're on our minds. Yeah, my impression, another impression, I guess, too, on trash enclosure is if I'm on 47th Street unit on the far corner, I mean, it's easier for me to take my trash to work and throw it away than it is to walk, all the way to the far corner of the development. So I just think as far as usability is concerned, it should be, there should be an attempt made to get it central. If not one on each side. I hate adding trash enclosures, but this is a big development and it's a long ways away for some of the front units. The the amount of times it's used would be cut in half too, if there is a second one. So the doors opening and closing and the lids banging and, banging open and closed is going to be less impactful to the neighbors if there's one on each side. So I think central is ideal if that can be looked at, one central unit. As far as I'm not yet convinced that the irrigation ditch on that property, which then eliminates all that perimeter landscaping, is the best solution. If there's a way to have that come down the central corridor, and I mean, there is a way, it just has to be explored and engineered to come down that central corridor, then we can have perimeter landscaping back, and then that helps mitigate the trash enclosure as well on that north side. So I think that needs to be, it was said in the presentation that, kind of something has to give, but it's a sacrifice to the neighbors and the landscaping elements that are required by code. So I think the sacrifice needs to be made internal to the development rather than to the neighbors and at the expense of city code. So I think that needs to be looked at. As far as 47th Street elevations, I think that there is some solid and void going on there now. And, looking at the street when we're kind of at an angle to the notch out of that second floor patio, that does give us kind of this element that we're looking for as far as kind of material changes and some articulation in that building facade. There seems to be enough glazing now on that facade to meet code, and it does have the kind of porch stoop element. Could it be more articulated and have some more kind of depth to those 47th Street walls? It certainly could. But I think it's an improvement from where it was. And I agree with you, Brett, on that actual courtyard on 47th Street. I don't know if I missed it the first time as far as the fencing basically blocking off that entire spine, or if that fencing is now shown. But certainly that element is something that we want to have part of the identity of the street front of this development, not have it be just a fence that we're looking at. So I think that does two things. As you mentioned, it gives identity to that street facade, but it does also, in a way, open up those rear buildings and kind of draw those rear buildings into part of the project whole. So I think that's really, really important that be opened up and kind of part of the community presentation to that street front. I think that went through some of the points that I had in the presentation. So that's what I have for now. I want to bounce any of that around. I don't disagree with your fire room. I don't disagree with your fire riser room comment. And that moving also opens up the, what might be a pushback from the irrigation district as far as their accessibility for the tiled pipe that would and could go through there. Because my experience, what I've heard is that, they need enough room to dig a pipe out, which isn't much more than a mini excavator at the end of the day in reality.
I'm thinking if from the current location on the perimeter over there, if that's going to be an acceptable amount of space to get in there and do what they need to do, then
And it is
by
between
all
there too.
means, yeah, I mean, I think it needs to be explored and
And also bears mentioning that to have river water, which the state defines as surface water, readily available on site going through the site and not using it is a missed opportunity and disservice to the arid west that we live in.
Thoughts on the my comment on the amenities, those two amenity buildings, and just
Yeah, I see the point. You know, someone could live in a front unit and kind of not know they existed, but if they are more of a feature and look like something unique, you know, it's not to the degree of looking like a clubhouse, but it's to the degree of looking like something other than another.
And I think just for clarity of my comment, I mean, it could be something as simple as, you know, utilizing some of the faux wood type finished material, kind of peeling back that lower level and just adding kind of a little bit of more articulation with just the material usage and fenestrations. I mean, I'm not necessarily saying that it needs to have a totally different design overhaul or look or any. I just feel that there's some more attention that can be given to where the signage can be more of not the way that individuals find out it's there. I mean, it's almost it's visually identifiable that there's something different at those locations.
Yeah, because you have this repetitive unit, and then there's an exception. There's something different. It would bring a level of curiosity of why is that different? Oh, that's because that's the office or that's the bike storage. I agree with you.
All right, it is sounding like you're looking for some items to be addressed. The next date that would be available would be March 6th, same time, same place. Should it be available?
I feel like we're close on these things. I'm not sure when you get through it.
And the applicant is asking that it not be continued as you get ready for your decision, but should you continue it, the next date would be March 6th, provided that the applicant can provide the revised materials 14 days in advance.
Well, I don't think that I feel comfortable with all of these items that we've been talking about being conditions that are not going to be reviewed and looked at.
Yeah, or potentially so heavily conditioned that the applicant wants to make and propose different changes anyway.
I didn't quite hear that.
So
The applicant is asking that you might repeat that, Mr. Hurd.
Well, Brett was saying that these were items that we're going to want to see again because there's a number of them and they're design related. So we should continue it. And what I was saying was, if we condition this so heavily that, I mean, we'd be basically designing it through our conditions, which then the applicant would want to go back and redesign it their way anyway. So I'm saying
I think there.
it should be pushed.
Did explore asking we were asked questions about those.
We can't hear the applicant.
It's somewhat out of order. So the applicant has has approached the podium, wishing to address the members. With that, please do note that it's somewhat out of order. And so you've already had the opportunity to present tonight. If you have points of clarification, we should allow it. But if it's to state the case, I think it is wholly out of order.
Is it points of clarification?
Hi, committee members, Jeff Bauer, 601 West Bannock in Boise. I think what we just want to reiterate here is we've been going through the design review process, I think, for 5 months now. The comments sound the same as they were at the initial meeting. And I think what we'd like to offer now are, responses to those comments. I'm not sure we got direct questions on those issues in advance of our rebuttal or a chance to weigh in on those design recommendations. And I think there are quite a few that we're in agreement with that we could step through and maybe take them off the list and narrow this down at least so that when we come back, we're only looking at a couple items instead of, 8 or 10 that were articulated. For instance, we're not really sure what you want us to do with the trash enclosures. We're happy to add another one at the loss of a parking stall. The piping of the irrigation lateral, I think, is a no-go based on their jurisdictional overlay. That's just something they're requiring. At best, we'll have to do 2 90-degree bends to get it in one of those drive aisles. And even then, they don't want it to be paved over. So I think that's another issue we can take off the list. We like your node idea on 47th, Mr. Labrie. We're happy to remove the fencing there and put some hardscape in and activate that. Happy to add more signage to our bike room and maintenance room. Again, those are private facilities. We're not really looking to invite the public in there. This is a very small site, 2 acres. I'm sure all the residents will know where their amenities are. So I think that's most of what we looked at in terms of the pass through to the building being developed to our east. We can try our best to open that up some more. Again, we don't think that needs another hearing. I think you could direct staff to require that to be opened up and landscaped for additional open space.
The irrigation pipe is paved under every street that it runs under, and many driveways throughout the district. So, and it's functioning where it is now. So you're proposing to move it. In the irrigation district, once you move it and tile it, it's 100% your responsibility to maintain it. So it can go anywhere on the site except under buildings.
Commissioner Hurd, I'm not sure if that was a question or a statement, but they do want it located on the property line. They do not want it to be paved over. And it's their expectation that when those properties to the north develop, they're going to take some easement there as well to allow additional access and maintenance of that. And we can't use that water really in a practical sense, we have very little irrigable area, and to use it and still meet the city's goals for conservation, we'd need a pump house and to pressurize it. And so again, for the amount of space we have, that's really not practical. So I know I'm out of order, but I think, again, we would take conditions on the node at 47th, the pedestrian connection to the east, additional signage and entrance material changes. We would again split the trash enclosure on north and south sides. Those are all conditions we would be acceptable with. And I think that addresses, 90% of the comments I've heard. So thank you.
What are your thoughts, Derek?
Design it for them through conditions? Is that
I don't
what you're asked to do?
I guess I'm a little concerned with not seeing how they're going to address the conditions.
Right.
No, I guess we could approve it based on those conditions with staff's review. But if staff doesn't feel comfortable, once the review documents come in, then it needs to come back to us. So I don't.
Right. And yeah, and I'm hung up on irrigation too. I think that some of the, as the applicant mentioned, some of the items are easy to condition and they can be taken off the table, perhaps. But I'm hung up on losing, hundreds of feet of perimeter landscaping at the expense of, the interpretation of the applicant with what the irrigation district has said, and not forcing that issue with the irrigation district, because I know there's a lot of leeway with what irrigation districts can do and can approve and can work with developers that are willing to work with them to make it work. And
I guess I would think that if we need to look at that as the ultimate solution, that it has to be placed there. I feel that there's a lack of support documentation that really justifies the need for tiling it completely and for locating it there. So maybe that's just, again, just some additional documentation from the irrigation district, civil engineer, both on what the specifics concerning the fact that these other potential locations were not viable. And this is the only viable solution. As we're eliminating landscaping and.
Right.
So I guess I'm not just comfortable hearing that, well, that's what
And
that's the only
I'm
thing
not,
we can do.
yeah, and I'm not comfortable hearing that, well, this is the, you know, this is the answer because it's the easiest answer, which is kind of maybe the impression that I got.
So this is and I believe this is the first that we've seen this on a formal hearing basis. It was just a pre-app prior to this.
I don't recall.
That is correct.
Okay.
So I mean, I think my position is still the same, that
To continue it.
I would like to continue it, and I would like to see the items addressed.
Is that a motion, Mr. Labrie?
That is a motion.
I'll second the
Continue to a
motion.
date certain.
And that would be of March 6th.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, then. Thank you to the applicant and the members of the public on this item. And with that, we'll move on to design review fiscal year 2023. And I'll turn it over to Ms. Delgado.
Hi, everyone. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
My name is Jorre Delgado. I'm here to present the Silver Bucket project located at 306 East 46th Street in Garden City. As you guys all know, you have seen this project a few times on a formal hearing. And for the sake of this meeting and time, I will jump to kind of what we ended on last time and what you guys were really wanting to see to get this pushed through and have an approval. And that was the front facades facing 46th Street on these front two buildings. And with the new design that we have, we've actually rotated the building. Like I had mentioned, that I wasn't sure if it was going to be possible, but it actually was possible for us to kind of rotate the building and put the stairs at the back of it. So we were able to actually move those balconies, which are the people's living room, kitchen area, more of their common area, to the front, so that those balconies, those doors can open up to 46th Street. People can stand out on those balconies. It's really facing 46th Street now, and it's really interacting with that side of the street. The other duplex on the other side, we did not flip that one, although we did add some different elements to the front, some more windows and some awnings. The reasoning for not flipping this one was we kind of just mixed it up, did a couple of different elevations on those front. So this is still that stairwell. And if we were to flip this building, it would kind of cut into some of the parking spaces that are located directly behind it. So it is possible to flip this building, just it would end up cutting into a parking space. So if that is something that could be conditioned in there, then we're more than happy to flip it that way. But if not, we feel that these two front facades have really changed the look of the whole subdivision and kind of more face 46th Street and interact with the street better.
Now, a question for you.
Yes.
Did you, it looks like did the bike parking move out from in front of the, yeah, okay.
So we have bike parking kind of randomly throughout the subdivision. So this bike parking is currently right there because we didn't flip this one, so it's not somebody's front yard and there's, or front door. And so there still is a walkway right there because this does enter into their carport. So this is we felt an acceptable area for people to put their bikes since it wasn't somebody's actual front door. But we do have other bike racks located throughout the subdivision as well.
Okay, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Yep, I'm good. I'm open for comments and questions.
Well, I thought there was a few more comments than that. Pedestrian access. I think I kind of would like you to walk through the changes that you've made, or are you saying that the only change you made was the front facades?
So a majority of the changes that we did make were those front facades. We felt that flipping those really helped interact with the street. And then we do still have our pedestrian pathway that goes down the side of it, as well as internally, each one has their own walkway up to their front doors still. And then we do have pathways by all of the parking spaces still. So I don't think that any of the internal items have changed much from the last time you guys saw this. We were really focusing on getting that interaction with 46th Street and those front facades of those buildings. And then this back kind of open area that we had presented last time, we kind of kept the same. As you know, the project that just went before us, they presented their little area right there too. So I do think that there are some things that as theirs is coming more to a design, we could probably work together a little bit more here. We do have the same landscape architect, so I think that that'd be something that would be easily conditioned, that you guys could condition for us, is to make that more of a connection for everybody and make it more of a pedestrian open area. But other than that, I think that a majority of what we were trying to do was make sure that we got these front facades to really interact with 46th Street. And I guess one of our main reasoning for not having that main walkway down the other side of the property is there is already a subdivision there that's built and there already is an existing fence there. So we're at our setback right there to where we just wanted to put it all on one side and try to pull off of those people's backyards as much as possible.
Okay, I don't have any further questions right now or comments.
Me neither.
All right, then I'll turn it over to Ms. Veal for a staff report.
Good afternoon. This is design review fiscal year 2022-0023 for Silver Bucket, located at 306 East 46th Street. In the staff report on page 3, there is a quick summary of all of the public hearings and the discussions had during those hearings, including the most recent one, which is January 3rd. During that hearing, the primary discussions revolved around the streetscape lacking presence there on 46th Street, with the structures being set back too far. And the terminus view was discussed. However, in regards to the pedestrian pathway systems, not necessarily the public pathway, but the ones internal to the common drive, that was addressed at the January 3rd hearing, with some of the sidewalk being provided along the common drive. I just wanted to clarify that conversation that you just had. But as far as for this hearing on February 6th, there was new material submitted on the 23rd, which included an updated site plan, the schematics and floor plans, as well as renderings. So there was a new sidewalk connection from the front door entrance of duplex A and B to the proposed public sidewalk along 46th Street. There was additional front facade designs. There was the removal of garden boxes as an amenity, the relocation of 3 bike racks, which that number stayed the same. It was just relocation of it. And then there is a terminal view rendering from 46th Street. However, there are still items that are up for discussion. They have been conditioned in the decision document to either require compliance or that they are permitted. For example, the common open space still remains to be deficient. There was a common open space map or diagram exhibit that is part of the record that identifies where the common open space is, but it isn't in compliance with the dimensional standards set forth in code. So further discussion is needed on that, or further identification at least. There is a particularly difficult provision in code that applicants struggle to meet, and it's the dimensional standards of the open space being 20 by 20. And so that's where staff's main concern lies. The parking remains deficient by 8 vehicular spaces. It's conditioned that is permitted based off of the alternatives to on-site parking through the pedestrian pathway that they are providing, which is to the public, and the bike parking spaces. And new site plans were submitted, landscape plans were not updated, so conditions regarding landscaping stayed the same. It has also been conditioned to allow for the tiling of the drains on site. The site has 2. It has the Thurman Mill drain, which we were just discussing at the previous application. It's that same drain, same line. And then they also have the Davis drain, which we have previously discussed in other hearings. And then regarding perimeter landscape along the northern property boundary line, that remains to be non-existent due to the public pedestrian and bicycle pathway easement that the city is wanting. But that does require perimeter landscaping there along the northern boundary line, but there is a fence proposed. And that sums up the changes that are for this hearing. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Ms. Veal, in the draft potential conditions of approval, there's a number of items that have been highlighted. And just for clarification, are those items that have been added or that are requesting to have some clarification?
Oh, right, sorry. So the conditions highlighted in the decision document are essentially items that need to be noted or specifically stated. For example, number 2 under site specific requirements is in regard to the deficiency of parking spaces. So number 2 is saying that the site has provided enough alternatives to vehicular transportation per code and is permitted to be deficient by 8 parking spaces. And that's if the committee does find that the deficiency is made up for by those alternatives to on-site parking. And then number 1 under prior to construction, it does say that a minimum of 5,150 square feet of common open space is required. So that's a typo there. So it needs to be required, and that's just based off of generalized code requirements. But the highlighted portion beneath it is common open space calculations may incorporate the common open space of the adjacent parcel being developed to the west, which is the application that we just discussed. Design review fiscal year 2022 0022, because they are abutting each other and they are proposing common open space adjacent to each other, which includes landscaping, pathway connections, etc. It has been drafted to include that common open space if the committee believes that this current site does not have to provide its own common open space that meets code. So discussion could be had there, and I can answer any questions. I don't know if I explained that well enough. But yes.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Veal?
So that, I guess that common open space, then you've drafted in a way that the continuation of the other development is meeting the code. Or
Yeah.
square footage of common area.
So the square footage of this development, I believe, is deficient by at least 100 square feet, if not more, based off of the plans that were submitted. However, it is abutting the adjacent properties, common open space landscaping. So it's drafted in what I believe in such a way that where it immediately connects with the adjacent property, that can be counted. So call it an extra 100 square feet. It's not intended to be the entire property or the entire common open space of that adjacent property.
And is there in the packet or a condition to be written that kind of keeps that connection open and keeps that shared one to the other?
So we have, there is not a condition drafted in either decision document to require that it remain open, just that the connection be there and remains indefinitely. The pathways specifically need to connect with one another. But if they were to put up a fence, there is not something prohibiting that as of right now in the conditions. So a condition would need to be drafted to essentially prohibit any kind of privacy fencing or disassociation of that entire area.
Okay, yeah, it seems like the intention both ways. So if there's a condition that it's written to clarify that intention, that would be helpful.
All right, thank you. If there are no further questions, I'll open it up to the public testimony. Is there anybody online who wishes to provide testimony? All right, I'm not seeing anybody. Is there anybody in the audience who wishes to provide testimony on this? Mr. Bauer. Okay, thank you. With that, I'll close the public testimony and turn it back over to Ms. Delgado.
Regarding the common open space towards the back of the property, I have been in communication with the other architect that did the presentation earlier. And like I mentioned, we do have the same landscape architect working on both of those. So I can make sure that as we continue on and they continue on with the development of these, that we have something to show you that shows that that common open space stays open and that there's no fences being put up.
Thank you. Any further questions for Ms. Delgado? All right.
And if one clarification, I guess, is if the other developments irrigation ditch moves to what would be, I think, center of your site, then you could run the irrigation ditch down center of road in essence, I would imagine.
we would have to have our civil engineer take a look at that, but potentially, but we also have that Davis Canal running the opposite direction. So we'd have to look at the engineering on those two crossing paths. But I mean, it's a potential if they are required to move theirs. But again, we're just trying to align with where they had initially said they were going to move theirs. And we had both thought it was a good idea if we were both going to be moving them to that location. But if they are going to run theirs directly down the middle, then that's a potential that we could do. But obviously not ideal, but it's definitely not off the table.
Thanks.
Thank you. Now I'll open it up for discussion. Close the public hearing and open it up for discussion.
I think that street front elevation is meeting everything I was looking for it to work with code. And then as far as internal site circulation, it looks like we can walk from 46th Street up in front of duplex A and then on a stone path to get to unit C. And along on what would be, it's calling out a raised 4-inch wide stamped concrete sidewalk with a rolled curb. So we have kind of that internal site circulation. I guess the only missing connection is from the end of that pathway to the fourplexes on the back.
That's what I still think we're missing, and but I think we can condition some connectivity from the end of those walks, whether it's some colored concrete or whatever, some way to get over to that plaza that's kind of an island.
Yep.
And then, I'm in agreement with, I think those front elevations have come a long ways to really address kind of that street presence and engaging with the street. So, and I don't think it's necessary. I think that it doesn't have to be symmetrical, both the same, one's flipped, one's not. They both still feel that they address the street in my mind.
So with conditions that staff has written in, does it work for us at this point? I think it works for me.
So just a point of clarification with a condition requiring that that back area have an easement to allow for the common open space to connect.
Yes, and to connect that unit A to the back fourplexes that with the internal site circulation.
And would that include a materials change to the point of the connectivity?
Yeah, I would suggest that the stamped concrete, whatever that material is, and however that's designated, that continues.
that a motion?
Yeah, I was waiting if Jenna had any further clarifications.
Yes, one that's just pointed out by Hanna is there's a condition that the Davis Drain and Thurman Mill be addressed as proposed, and perhaps that condition could be reworked to provide flexibility as well. It's condition number 3. Under site specific.
Get there.
Perhaps.
No, wait a minute,
This is
which decision document is this that we're looking at? The one that's January 3rd or the one that's draft potential decision, December 5th?
It's the January 3rd one, I believe.
I'm not seeing a condition,
Let me see. Make
it's like
sure.
condition number 3.
So design review fiscal year 2022-0023.
There's 2 decision documents in there, right?
Mhm. What we could do is just bring it back to make sure that it's accurate in this meeting. So it looks like that decision document isn't online. What we could do if, should you move forward with an approval, is approve the application and bring back the decision document for consent agenda, which you could pull off if it's not accurate, but to make sure that it accurately reflects your decision.
Okay, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, me too. So I'll move to approve DSR FY 22-23 with the conditions as written and including the updated decision or conditions that we just discussed.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. And this concludes.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
Thank
Joe.
Thank you. This concludes the items that we had on the design review committee. This application, we do have a consultant meeting that directly follows this. But with that, thank you for everybody that attended the design review committee meeting. And we can adjourn the meeting at 4:37. Yes, please.